To an ancient observer standing on the same horizon year after year, these movements would a thin line of pale light appears above the eastern horizon before sunrise, almost too faint to notice. The sky is still dark, the air is cold, and the last stars remain suspended above the rooftops like tiny points of ash. There is nothing dramatic about the scene. No sudden flash, no burning object, no sound, just a gradual change in the darkness as one section of the horizon begins to brighten. Ancient observers knew this moment well. They watched the sky because the sky was their clock, their calendar, and their record of time. Long before telescopes, satellites, and digital observatories, people measured the movement of the sun, the changing phases of the moon, and the shifting positions of the stars. And one ancient text went further than simply recording what appeared above them. The Book of Enoch describes the heavens as an ordered system, with appointed courses, gates, seasons, and movements that were not supposed to be ignored. The text repeatedly emphasizes that the heavenly lights follow established paths. The sun rises through designated places. The moon changes according to a measurable sequence. The seasons arrive in their appointed order. And when that order is misunderstood, something begins to change, not necessarily in the sky itself, but in humanity's ability to recognize what the sky is showing. This is where the warning becomes important. The Book of Enoch does not need to predict a spectacular object falling from heaven to make its message relevant. Its astronomical sections describe something quieter, signs connected to movement, timing, and the expected pattern of the heavenly lights. That distinction matters because a sign does not have to be loud. It only has to be visible to someone who knows what to watch. The text that contains these descriptions was not preserved in the standard biblical canon used by most Christian traditions. By the 4th century, church authorities were drawing clear boundaries around the books regarded as canonical, and Enoch stood outside those boundaries. Yet the text survived through other manuscript traditions, most importantly in Ethiopic copies, while fragments discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls later demonstrated that Enochic writings were already circulating in the ancient world centuries before those later manuscripts were produced. That discovery changed the conversation. It showed that the astronomical material was not simply a medieval invention. Ancient communities were already preserving traditions about Enoch and the heavenly order long before Christianity became established. And now, when modern astronomers observe the same sky with instruments capable of measuring movements with extraordinary precision, an uncomfortable question emerges. Not whether every modern event fulfills an ancient prophecy, but whether we have misunderstood what Enoch meant by a sign. Because the sign may not be something that suddenly appears. It may be something already happening quietly above us, hidden in a pattern most people never stop to examine. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says about the movement of the heavenly lights, what the ancient manuscripts actually preserve, and why its warning about celestial signs deserves a closer look. If ancient mysteries hidden in the heavens fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from scripture, history, and the records that survived them. But here's what makes this stranger. When you move beyond the opening warning and examine the astronomical material itself, the language becomes far more precise than most people realize. In 1 Enoch, especially in the section commonly called the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, the movement of the sun and moon is presented as an ordered system. The text does not simply say that lights appear in heaven. It describes where they rise, where they set, how their positions change, and how those changes correspond to the divisions of the year. The sun is associated with a series of gates along the eastern horizon, and those gates correspond to different positions of sunrise. As the year progresses, the point where the sun rises shifts. The daylight becomes longer or shorter. The pattern repeats. Been visible evidence that the heavens followed a recognizable order. This is important because Enoch's warning is built around the idea of appointed courses. The heavenly bodies are not described as wandering without direction. Their movements establish time itself. The calendar depends upon them. Seasons depend upon them. Human activity depends upon the ability to recognize their pattern. That means a disturbance in celestial reckoning would not be a minor inconvenience. It could affect the way an entire community understood when one season ended and another began. The text therefore treats heavenly knowledge as something that must be preserved accurately. Enoch is shown information that he is expected to record and transmit. The instruction is not casual. It is presented as knowledge that should remain intact. This becomes especially interesting when the ancient manuscripts are considered. Fragments of Enochic writings found among the Dead Sea Scrolls include Aramaic material that predates the surviving medieval Ethiopic manuscripts. These fragments establish that the Enochic tradition was already circulating in Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. They do not prove that every later interpretation of Enoch is correct, but they establish the antiquity of the material. That distinction matters. The astronomical system was not created by modern readers looking for hidden predictions. Its basic structure is genuinely ancient. And when you compare that structure with modern astronomy, the contrast is striking. Today, observatories calculate the movement of planets, moons, comets, asteroids, and distant stars using mathematical models. Astronomers can predict eclipses years in advance. They can determine where the sun will rise on a particular date and measure changes that are impossible to detect casually. The technology is completely different, but the underlying principle is familiar. Observe the heavens, identify the pattern, record the movement, and compare the observation with the expected course. That is exactly why the Enochic material deserves careful attention. It does not need to contain modern scientific formulas to preserve an ancient understanding that the sky is measurable. The warning becomes more subtle when we realize that a celestial sign can be completely natural and still carry meaning within a particular worldview. An eclipse is natural. A conjunction is natural. The changing position of sunrise is natural. Yet each one is also a marker of time and movement. Enoch's concern is not simply that people will see the sky. It is that they will fail to recognize its order. And that possibility is much closer to the modern world than it first appears. And this is where it gets disturbing. The deeper you go into the astronomical sections of the Book of Enoch, the more clearly the warning begins to center on a problem of recognition rather than spectacle. The text describes the heavenly lights as following established courses, and it repeatedly returns to the idea that these courses can be observed, measured, and remembered. In 1 Enoch 72, the movement of the sun is connected to 6 eastern gates and 6 western gates. These gates represent changing positions along the horizon as the year advances. The sun does not rise from exactly the same point every morning. It moves gradually northward and southward through the annual cycle. To an ancient observer, that movement was not invisible. It could be marked against hills, walls, stones, or a carefully chosen horizon. The same basic observation remains possible today, although modern instruments can measure it with extraordinary precision. The text then moves into the changing length of daylight. During one part of the year, the days become longer. During another, they become shorter. The pattern is presented as part of an ordered heavenly system rather than as an accidental change. Then the moon enters the picture. Its phases are described as part of the larger cycle, linking lunar observation with the measurement of time. These passages matter because they show what Enoch means when it speaks about signs in heaven. The sign does not necessarily have to be an unknown object appearing where nothing existed before. A sign can be a movement that reveals something about the structure of time. It can be a recurring event whose importance becomes visible only when someone knows how to interpret the pattern. That idea creates a powerful connection with modern observation. Astronomers today constantly compare what they see with what their models predict. When an eclipse occurs at the expected moment, the calculation is confirmed. When an object appears in an unexpected position, researchers investigate the discrepancy. When a star changes brightness, scientists record the change and search for a physical explanation. The sky becomes a vast field of measurable information. Enoch's ancient framework is obviously not modern astronomy, but it shares one important assumption. Celestial movement can be observed and organized. This becomes even more significant when the history of the text is considered. The discovery of Enochic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls demonstrated that traditions associated with Enoch were circulating centuries before the Christian era. The fragments provide an ancient physical connection to material that later survived in Ethiopic manuscripts. That means the astronomical tradition belongs to a much older textual world than many modern readers realize. It was not invented by 19th century translators. It was not created by people living in the age of telescopes. Its roots reach into a period when careful observation of the sky was essential to agriculture, calendars, religious festivals, navigation, and daily life. And that brings us to the warning itself. If the heavenly bodies follow an appointed order, then the real danger is not necessarily that the sky will suddenly stop behaving normally. The danger is that people will stop recognizing the pattern. A sign can remain directly above us while becoming invisible through familiarity. The sun rises every morning, so most people stop watching where it rises. The moon changes shape every month, so most people stop measuring its progression. The stars shift across the seasons, but modern life has made artificial light and digital clocks more important than the horizon. Enoch's warning suddenly feels less ancient. It becomes a warning about attention. The sign may already be happening quietly, not because something impossible has appeared, but because something ordinary is revealing a pattern that almost nobody is watching anymore. Here's what the translators left out. The most important detail is not necessarily a secret sentence removed from every surviving manuscript. It is the force of the language surrounding the appointed courses of the heavenly bodies. In many English translations, the astronomical sections can sound like a simple description of ancient astronomy. But the repeated emphasis on fixed order, appointed movement, and the correct reckoning of time gives the passage a stronger meaning. Enoch is not merely being shown what the sun and moon look like. He is being shown how their movements establish a structure that human beings are expected to understand. In 1 Enoch 82, the instruction becomes especially clear. Enoch is told to preserve the knowledge of the heavenly courses and teach it to his children. The information is treated as something that can be transmitted accurately or lost through careless handling. That matters because the warning about signs in the sky depends on accurate observation. If the pattern is misunderstood, the sign can be present without being recognized. The history of Enoch adds another layer. By the 4th century, Christian authorities were defining the boundaries of accepted scripture. Athanasius's Festal Letter of 367 is one important example because it lists the books he regarded as canonical while separating them from other writings. Enoch was not included in that canonical collection. Centuries later, the work remained preserved in the Ethiopian Christian tradition, where complete Ethiopic manuscripts survived while the text was largely absent from Western biblical collections. Then the 19th century brought renewed scholarly attention. Richard Lawrence published an English translation in 1821, helping introduce the work to a much wider audience. Later scholars compared manuscripts, studied the language, and examined the relationship between the Ethiopic text and older fragments. The discovery of Aramaic Enoch material among the Dead Sea Scrolls added physical evidence that the tradition was already ancient. The significance of this evidence is easy to misunderstand. It does not mean every modern claim about Enoch is automatically true. It means the underlying text has a documented history reaching far deeper into antiquity than the surviving medieval copies alone would suggest. And now the modern parallel becomes impossible to ignore. Contemporary astronomy has shown that the apparent movement of the heavens can be measured with astonishing accuracy. Earth rotates. Earth orbits the sun. The moon follows a predictable path. The position of sunrise changes through the year because of Earth's axial tilt and orbit. Eclipses occur according to geometric relationships that can be calculated. Nothing about these facts requires supernatural explanation, but they demonstrate the basic principle behind the ancient observation. The sky is ordered. It changes according to cycles. Those cycles can be recognized. And sometimes a very small change in what is observed can reveal something much larger about the system producing it. That is exactly why the Enochic warning remains relevant. The text directs attention toward the heavens and asks the reader, in effect, to recognize order before assuming chaos. The sign may not be an object descending through the atmosphere. It may be a recurring celestial event that becomes meaningful because it exposes the structure of time. A modern observer can dismiss the daily movement of the sun because it is familiar. An ancient observer could not afford to. The horizon was their clock. The seasons were written across the sky. And the warning preserved in Enoch may therefore be simpler and more unsettling than the popular interpretation suggests. The sign does not need to arrive suddenly. It can already be happening above us while almost everyone is looking somewhere else. Now here's where it gets active. The modern world has not stopped watching the sky. In fact, we watch it more closely than any generation before us. Satellites circle the Earth. Radio telescopes listen to distant sources. Space observatories monitor stars, planets, galaxies, and transient events that cannot be seen with the unaided eye. Researchers compare observations from different instruments and build models that can predict where celestial objects should appear. Yet the more precisely we measure the heavens, the more obvious one principle becomes. The sky is constantly changing, and much of that change happens quietly. A star can brighten or fade without anyone on the ground noticing. A small asteroid can pass through near-Earth space without becoming visible to most people. A planet can move into a temporary alignment with another object and appear as a single bright point from a particular location. None of these events automatically fulfills an ancient prophecy, but they demonstrate why the language of a sign can be misunderstood. A sign does not have to be spectacular. It can be measurable. It can be temporary. It can be visible only from a certain angle. And it can become important because people understand what the movement means. This is where the Enochic warning becomes surprisingly relevant. The Book of Enoch repeatedly presents the heavenly bodies as following appointed courses. The sun has its gates. The moon has its changing phases. The stars occupy their positions. The seasons follow their sequence. The concern is not simply that something strange will appear. The concern is that the established order can become confused in human understanding. Modern science gives us an example of how easily this can happen. Before light pollution transformed the night sky, ordinary people could see thousands of stars from dark locations. Today, many city dwellers see only a fraction of them. The stars have not disappeared. Our ability to observe them has changed. That distinction is crucial. A phenomenon can remain physically present while becoming practically invisible. The same principle applies to patterns. If nobody records a gradual change, the change can remain unnoticed. If nobody compares observations across decades, a long-term movement can look insignificant. Enoch's emphasis on preserving knowledge therefore becomes more important, not less. The text treats celestial information as something worth recording for future generations. That is exactly what modern astronomy does through archives, surveys, catalogs, and long-term observation programs. The methods are radically different, but the purpose overlaps. Preserve what the sky is doing so that future observers can compare it with what came before. And this brings us to the central possibility behind the title. What if the sign is not waiting for a future date? What if the warning concerns a process already visible through celestial cycles? What if the thing people expect to arrive dramatically is actually something much quieter, something that requires careful observation before its significance becomes obvious? That does not mean every unusual light is a message. It does not mean every eclipse or planetary alignment is a supernatural warning. It means the ancient text should be read according to its own emphasis. Watch the courses. Watch the changes. Understand the calendar. Do not confuse familiarity with insignificance. The sun rising every morning can seem ordinary precisely because it is reliable. The moon returning through its phases can seem unremarkable because it repeats. But repetition is what makes a pattern recognizable. And once the pattern is recognized, even a small deviation becomes meaningful. This is why the ancient warning remains powerful without requiring an exaggerated conclusion. Enoch describes a heaven that can be observed. Modern astronomy confirms a heaven that can be measured. Between those two worlds lies thousands of years of observation. The tools have changed. The instruments have changed. The language has changed. But the sky remains above us, moving according to patterns that began long before anyone gave them names. And perhaps the quiet sign is not something we need to wait for. Perhaps it is already there, moving through the darkness, waiting for someone to notice. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that the Book of Enoch secretly now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that the book identifies a modern spacecraft, an approaching asteroid, or a supernatural object that scientists have failed to detect. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches something real and measurable. The heavens operate through patterns, cycles, and movements that can be observed long before their significance is understood. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If Enoch preserves an ancient record of celestial observation and repeatedly emphasizes appointed courses, If the sun, moon, and stars were understood as markers of time whose movements could be recorded and transmitted. If ancient Enochic fragments demonstrate that these traditions were circulating centuries before the surviving medieval manuscripts. And if modern astronomy continues to reveal increasingly precise patterns in the same sky, then the most reasonable conclusion is not that every modern event is a secret fulfillment of an ancient prediction. The stronger conclusion is that the ancient writers were paying attention to something humanity still depends upon today. The sky is a system. It moves, it changes, it repeats, and those repetitions create a record. This is why the final warning deserves to be understood differently from the way it is often presented. Enoch does not need to give us the name of a modern object for the text to remain relevant. The warning is about recognition. A sign can be visible without being understood. A pattern can continue for centuries without attracting attention. A change can happen gradually enough that an entire generation accepts it as normal. Modern astronomy has shown us just how much can happen beyond unaided human vision. Telescopes reveal distant stars. Spacecraft measure planets. Satellites monitor objects moving around Earth. Automated surveys compare millions of observations. The amount of information available to humanity has become enormous. Yet information is not the same as attention. We can have more data than any ancient observer could imagine and still overlook what is directly above us. That may be the quietest part of the Enochic warning. The sign does not necessarily arrive with noise. It does not necessarily appear as a blazing object that everyone sees. It may be embedded inside a cycle that has been repeating for thousands of years. It may become visible only when someone compares one observation with another. And that brings us back to the pale line of light above the horizon. The darkness is almost gone now. The stars have faded. The eastern sky is brighter than it was only minutes ago. Nothing has exploded. Nothing has fallen. No impossible object has appeared. The sky has simply continued its course. That is exactly what makes the ancient description so compelling. Enoch's heavenly system depends upon continuity. The sun rises. The seasons change. The moon moves through its phases. The stars return according to their patterns. The heavens remain in motion while human generations come and go. The sign, then, may already be happening because the sky itself is constantly showing us information. We simply have to know what we are looking at. The Book of Enoch survives because someone, somewhere, continued to copy it. The astronomical tradition survives because someone continued to observe the heavens. And the modern record survives because researchers continue measuring what is above us. Different centuries, different tools, the same sky. So when you look upward tonight, do not assume that the absence of spectacle means the absence of significance. Watch the horizon. Notice the moon. Notice the stars. Notice how the sky changes from one season to another. Because the ancient warning was never only about something arriving. It was about learning to recognize the signs already moving above humanity. The pale light is now fully visible. It is still there, still rising, still moving across the same vast heavens that Enoch's readers watched thousands of years ago. And perhaps that is the final point. The sign does not need to announce itself. It only needs to be noticed.